Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good night or morning or whatever it is, wherever it is. And that everybody is doing delightful. Trying to make sure everything is set right. We'll go with that. Hello, 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 hello. Welcome. Present for classes. Very cute. Thank you. I have had some very low lives lately, and so I'm thinking that because I downloaded the live studio thing, and that they allow me to have the live studio, for some reason it's not getting out as much. So I'm experimenting with topics that I've done before, but they kept getting me bananaed, and so I haven't been using them lately. So I thought maybe I'd see what I get. These are all topics that are pretty close to my heart because they're pretty close to the understanding of who we are as people, who we are as a species, and who we were. And they're also very close to, an understanding of making changes within our life, right? Some of those changes that we need to make. Over and over and over again, I think that we hear this very loud, raucous noise that is so beating down on all of us, right? This very loud, raucous noise, it kind of like indoctrinates us into this thought process. And kind of forces us to believe certain things and thought processes because we just don't have access to better understanding. And one of the things that the internet has really given us is access that we just didn't have before, right? We know that we talk a lot about, using grammar, or there's a lot of conversation in a lot of spaces these days about the fact that using grammar and using spelling as blocks to acceptance of people is gatekeeping, and that gives us this understanding deeper that there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens for a lot of people across many different communities, because a lot of people across many different communities end up, school doesn't happen, or the kindergarten to prison pipeline that we have, or just different fundamental parts of here in the United States what the society looks like. And we see that in a lot of cultures that follow along the same thought process, that the same things happen. And we see that it's important for us to take a look at those things and to understand that gatekeeping of everybody really happens. Like, whether they're gatekeeping your education by not supplying your education, or they're gatekeeping your education by supplying you with false education, that education, that gatekeeping, that issue, it just really happens across the board. And so when we look at that understanding, we can see that so many of us just don't have knowledge, and so many of us just don't have access to knowledge, because up until this kind of ability to go worldwide at the touch of our hands, we didn't have access to any of that for free. And after having access to that for free, and again, it's not really free, there's certain communities that have harder stepping stones to get to the access even now. When we're looking at that access being more readily available, is a better way to put it, we're seeing that even then, some of the access is, or some of the information is either blocked, some of the information is falsified, some of the information We haven't been taught how to curate information in most schools because of the way we've been indoctrinated. Um, and so this con- boiling pot, basically, so much of it is just this boiling mixing pot, um, that we see not only causes us to live within this state still, but is also causing us to like perpetuate this state from different angles, right? Um, as long as we are allowing the indoctrination, the feed, the whatever it is, to give us people to hate that are next to us instead of understanding the control from above, we are incapable of dismantling it. We are incapable of coming to a space where we are able to function better as a society, function better as a species, right? Get out of this nasty that we're in. When we're looking at history and we're looking at the past and we're looking at paleoanthropology and we're looking at prehistory and we're looking at all of the different things that we normally talk about in my lives, that deeper, darker, not darker, but deeper connection to the past, this further connection to the past. When we're looking at that, we can see that within that there is this level of connection and safety and community and humanity that we don't get today. Thank you so much. And we don't get that level of safety and humanity and interconnection and community today because it was taken from all of us. Every single last one of us. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what region you come from. Every single last one of us was robbed of that connection. And when every single last one of us was robbed of that connection, and that connection was replaced with an obligation to a higher power that is actually somebody physically right here taking you over every chance that they get, we see that really screws our brain up, really screws the way we interact up, and really keeps us down in this, right? When we look for ways to make the people on the same level as us, or even those on this level, you know, um, the problem, the thing to hate, the thing to abuse, the thing to with, what we are doing is allowing ourselves to live longer in that misery. You know, there's a lot of talk about people are voting against against what works for them. Like, there's a lot of talk I hear about, Republicans are voting against, any laws that will actually further their finances, right? Like they're basically voting to keep themselves poor, right? All of us are doing that to some level. Unless we are actively fighting to get rid of it and dismantle it, all of us are on some level voting to keep ourselves right here. And that voting to keep ourselves right here is very much about the fact that we're voting with our bodies and we're voting with our feet and we're voting with our mouths and we're voting with our hate and we're voting with our fight and we're voting with the this and the that and the hate and the contribution, the contributing to the deeper problem instead of trying to heal that deeper problem, instead of trying to fix that deeper problem. These are things that we need to understand, or that I want to convey along with conveying paleoanthropology, who we were before, how we can be, how many of us were able to be up until just a few hundred years ago, how many people are still fighting to be today, right? When we're looking at these things, it's really important to understand what causes them. And so when we're looking at the culture that I currently, unfortunately, kind of reside within, and the culture that the vast majority of people that I know reside within, And with the understanding that that's not the only culture, right? Um, we see that here in the United States, um, somewhat, though not as much within Canada, um, and you know, similar spaces have this tendency to think that have a tendency to think of things in this specifically, or not as specific, in a mono way, right? There's this indoctrination of monotheism, this indoctrination of mono-religion, this indoctrination of mono-thought, this indoctrination of being one form of perfect and fighting to be that one form of perfect. And so you get a culture that is abnormally monolithic, right? And that is that Western thought. You end up with a culture that it doesn't matter what country you live in, it doesn't matter what your geographical boundaries are, you have this very monolithic way of viewing things, this very monolithic way of stratifying, this very monolithic way of interaction with others and the way that you deal with others. And we call it a lot of different things, right? We blame it on Americans. We call it boomers. We call it, the colonialists. We call it the, whatever different thing that we're calling it. The base of it is that what we're looking at is Western thought. What we're looking at is this idea that originates in the Levant that you can control and own land and control and own things as you go up the scale of humanity to us, and then you can control and own us. This literally starts in the Middle East. It is literally our earliest show of it. It's our first flush of this ownership, right? Thank you. That's funny. It's really that first flush of ownership that we see coming out of the Middle East, and that first flush of ownership that we see coming out of the Levant area, really, Babylon. We call it civilization. I really hate the fact that we call this civilization, and the real reason that I hate the fact that we call this civilization is because there's nothing civilized about it. There's nothing civilized about it. There's nothing civilized, civil, taking care of each other as a community. Civil, as in civilian, as in a state, as in a group, as in a unit, as in together. Civil, there's nothing civil about this. There's nothing kind, there's nothing caring, there's nothing enveloping, there's nothing communicating or cohabitating or co-anything about this. So why do you call it civilization, right? Why is it civil to you? What about it is civil, right? So I really hate the word civilization anyways. I really hate the way that it comes across. I see within this that there's this thought that it's a pinnacle. At every point and every stop in our journey as humans, we have thought we've reached a pinnacle. Homo erectus, I'm damn sure thought they had reached the pinnacle. I'm sure the Neanderthal thought they were the pinnacle. At every point through our journey, every species thinks it's the pinnacle of species. Your dog is looking at you going, God, why you only move on 2 legs, you slow ass? Like, it. You know that your animals are looking at you go, psh, man, if you could fly, like every species, everything thinks it is the best and thinks that in that moment and in that time and in that achievement that they have the best, right? The fox in its den finds that den to be the most homey, safe, warm, comforting environment that it can possibly be in, right? It's not longing for your house. It's not longing for your 4 walls. It's not longing for your disconnect. It is in the womb of the earth. It is snuggled down. It is safe. What gets it in there, right? Every being believes it's at a pinnacle. We are no more at a pinnacle than we were 100,000 years ago. I argue frequently that we are less than a pinnacle than we were at 50,000 years ago. That we may think that this technology is fine, and I agree on so many levels. I would give it all up for safety, stability, community, and being in one space and not having to worry about being harmed and abused by other human beings. I would give every single iota of technology you have up for a community that doesn't have to worry about where it's going to live tomorrow. Every iota of it. And I can tell you right now, I'd thrive better than most people today. Internet, technology, all of this fancy stuff, it's great, but it ain't that great. And I've lived without it. So you can't tell me, well, if you've lived without it, you would know differently. I have. I have. So, and don't get me wrong, I love my comforts. I'm old, I'm disabled. I don't want to milk a cow. I wouldn't have cows. I would do other things, right? Like, you know, we had it so much better when we had a community that enveloped us and cared for us, right? We had it so much better when our sense of belonging and our sense of worth wasn't based on what we could be exploited for, right? Thank you. And so I really feel that when we look at that, we really see that shift when we see that shift with Western thought. Here in the US, it has led to the space that we're at now. We have the highest maternal mortality rate of the industrialized world. Maternal mortality rate is not just the infant, it is the mother too. And it is primarily among Black and Indigenous women. There is this belief in Western medicine that Black women don't feel pain. And there is this belief in Western medicine that all Indigenous women are partaking in a drug or drunk culture and therefore need their children taken away in some level, shape, or form, or don't understand pain. There is this medical blindness that is so racist still that we are killing women and babies. This is after, of course, we force them to have them. Okay. And I do not know what the numbers are today. I know that the numbers in 2018 were like 43% of our maternal cases are maternal mortality. 43% of pregnancies end in some form of maternal mortality, whether it is the mother or the infant. And I don't mean infant as in utero, as in a miscarriage. I mean due to the birth of that infant, due to the birthing process. We were at 43%. So, or were in 2018. We have to understand that the racism within our system really floods through every part of any system that was built based on racism. And the United States especially is built based on racism. Period. Of all the countries in the world, it is the one that is founded in every part of the start of it on racial segregation, on the belief that race exists. And because it is founded and steeped in this, because every part of it is built on the blood of Black people, on the stolen land of Indigenous people, and every part of the structure is meant to keep the atrocities justified. Every step of its building is meant to keep this right in anybody's eyes, right? And because of this, we see that here in the United States, South Africa came to us for their racism. They came to us to learn about apartheid because we have the best. Hitler got his racism from our eugenics programs. Concentration camps came from reservations. This stuff is ingrained in us, in this country, to the point that it literally infects every part of us. the number of maternal mortality rate today being 43%, and again, primarily in Black and Indigenous women, is founded on, or is the result of, a gynecological movement that was built through harming Black and Indigenous women. Period. Period. Not only do we see cases like Henrietta Lacks and the father of gynecology who operated without anesthesia on slaves, but we see the fact, sorry, but it's not the correct word, and we see the fact that within the entire scope of the time with Indigenous people, they were forced sterilizing Indigenous people. And after they stopped forced sterilizing Indigenous people in 1978, they're still forced sterilizing Indigenous women today. They're changing the way they do it to legalese, so that instead of doing it without consent, they're forcing consent through manipulation. You can't leave the hospital with your baby unless you get your tubes tied. So we see that the entire maternal structure within the US, the entire gynecological structure within the US, really becomes steeped in this racist ideology that has used Indigenous women and Black women as guinea pigs and as victims, and used its racism to create that. So when we're looking at that, we're seeing that we have to change the understanding of race, and we have to change the understanding of Western medicine, and we have to change the understanding of maternity. Because within this, we're looking at Western medicine is still something that very much looks at women as broken men. They test women's birth control pills on study groups of men. They test half of women's medications on study groups of men. They still are just starting to understand autism from a woman's standpoint, or neurodivergence from a woman's standpoint, because they've been studying it in men the whole time. They don't study women for women's issues. They study men because they are tracing it back again to them ancient Greeks, and taking it back to this idea that women are nothing more than broken men. Yeah, birth control pills. They test birth control on men, not on women. Not on women, but on men, right? When we're looking at that, we're seeing that this trace back to the Greeks, this trace back to this idea that we are just broken men, is really this foundational thought process in everything happening throughout women's medicine. Because they don't understand enough. It's like 3 years ago, when maybe it was 5 years ago. I'll push that back to 10 years ago, when they finally mapped the clitoris and realized that it's actually like really deep within the body. And it actually is basically like, when it morphs, it's how it morphs into the male external genitalia. You can see the male external genitalia as a morph from the female clitoris. We are just now looking at things like this. They had to do a TED Talk 8 years ago, I think is the TED Talk that I saw on it, where they had to discuss the fact that the hymen is not like a bungee rubber trampoline thing across the end of a woman's vaginal passage, that the hymen is actually like a donut, and it's just like a donut membrane. Who knew? How many of us got told, you're going to bust your hymen, right? Like, there is so little understanding of women's reproductive organs or women's bodies which blows my mind when we are now coming to the understanding that somebody put it so eloquent the other day. Somebody was like, women are broken men, and a creator comes back with, well, what is going to happen when they find out that the seam along the nut sack is actually where the lips grow together when you become male from female. They're just now finding out that we all start women, we all start female. you know every fetus starts female. So there is this lack of understanding, and this lack of understanding is where we need to understand that this racism, this part of the structure, doesn't just go to the policing system, doesn't just go to, the schooling. It doesn't just go to, it goes in every little crack of what we are here in the United States. It is the literal foundation. The literal foundation. When we're looking at Western medicine is really, it's really new. Indigenous medicine has been here for thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. If we trace indigenous medicine back to the Neanderthals, we've been here with indigenous medicine for like 70,000 years, right? So indigenous medicine is 70,000 years old, and there are places that never lost it. Europe lost it. Europe lost it because of the church. And when Europe lost it because of the church, and it decided to gain it back after coming to Turtle Island and seeing here, you see that Europe decided to go back to the ancient Greeks instead of learning from the people around them, because, well, that's Europe. So when this happens, you see that modern medicine, allopathy, which I love, is really about 3,000 years old. It is best, with a 2,000-year break in between, right? Like, maybe I'll be generous and say an 1,800-year break in between. So it's 3,000 years old with 1,800 years off, and 1,800 years of actual, like, blindness, right? Whereas if you look around the world to indigenous medicine across the globe, you see that indigenous medicine across the globe stayed. It was deep and able to be maintained. You do see that within Arabic countries that medicine remained and translated from indigenous medicine to Arabic medicine. But you also see that not a lot of Europeans went to the Arabic medicine when the time comes. You see that the Arabic medicine does come into play a little bit later, and has greatly influenced us at this point, and has brought in a lot of really good influence, because it is the Arabic medicine that was able to continue along the path of indigenous medicine in those areas. And by Arabic, I apologize, I need to actually rephrase it, the Islamic medicine, because in Islamic states, medicine was still allowed. You see that an indigenous medicine was carried along in Islamic states when Islamic states took over indigenous spaces. And it carried over from the indigeneity of Islamic spaces in their start as it was as well. And that carry over of that medicine and that allowance of that medicine allowed Islamic areas to actually have a more advanced medicine than Western medicine. And so there's a lot of influx of Islamic medicine that actually brings in a lot of positivity, or influx of medicine from either current Islamic states or prior Islamic states. When we start to see this influx of indigenous and Black medicine coming in, and from here on, I'm going to refer to this as indigenous, but globally so. So when we start to see that there is this influx of indigenous medicine coming in from different spaces across the globe, we see that this understanding changes the modern understanding. This understanding really flows deeper. And I would like to also point out or include the fact that you see that a lot of Asian medicine, a lot of Eastern medicine, as it can be called, actually is coming in and actually is really affecting the way that Western modern medicine behaves, changing its structure and changing its thought. But you see that with the three of these things, that these are the three of these different spaces of indigeneity that are being incorporated currently into modern Western medicine. All of them are being incorporated currently, but not for very long. 50 years tops for any of them, to include Eastern medicine, to include medicine coming out of Asia. And my VA actually offers acupuncture, which is amazing. Well, it's combat acupuncture, they call it, because it's all based on the ears alone. Um, you see, though, that there is this influx of these different teachings that really, really give us better availability, better knowledge, better understanding of things. And it is that influx, it is that availability that really is pushing us forward. We still need to understand, though, especially here within the US, that there are so many problems within the maternal field, the gynecological field, that we are still facing high mortality rates. And again, high mortality rates, especially among Black and Indigenous women. We need to understand how this affects really every aspect of us. And we also need to understand how this affects communities. Oftentimes, it's not like the mothers who pass are only mothers with no children, right? Like, it's not like the mothers that pass are only mothers that this is their first pregnancy, right? There are mothers that pass that leave behind children. There are mothers that pass who leave behind the infant themselves, right? There are mothers who pass with the infant. There are gaping holes in communities due to this loss. And we need to understand how that affects across. This really ties in as well with the mass incarceration rates. Here in the United States, we are actually number one in mass incarceration across the globe. Of everything, we're number one in. We are number one in maternal mortality rates and mass incarceration. And we also, and I'm talking like the list, like those, the world is this, and the world is number one here, and which country is ranked this, and human rights violations, and which country is ranked this. We are ranked number one for mass incarcerations. We are ranked number one for maternal mortality, and we are ranked on a global scale number one for racism. And we are ranked number one on these things because, again, we have embedded them completely within our structure, within every facet of our society. Faucet drips. Every facet of our society. And with this, we see that this mass incarceration, we've talked before about the, what was it? For a while, it was the high school to prison pipeline, but it's really understood now that it is really a kindergarten to prison pipeline. There is mass incarceration in really any densely populated space of color. Any densely populated space of color, you are seeing that children end up incarcerated. And children end up incarcerated for things that they're not doing, right? I'm sure most of us have seen the video of, like the 9-year-old girl getting, gone off on and pepper sprayed in the back of a car, and somebody's screaming at her why she's, she needs to stop acting like a kid. And she's like, I'm 9. What do you want me to do? And this is a dark-skinned girl being attacked, right? A dark-skinned child being attacked. We're seeing that this happens across the board in any densely populated space of color. And we see that in these densely populated spaces of color, that it's really this outside police force. They don't, the people who come in and police are not people who live in your community. Unless you are living in a small town, your officers in your community are not local. I've lived in towns of 500 people. If you're in a small town, if you are in a small county, then you might have local police, but that's about it. When you're looking at that, what you're looking at is that you're getting people brought in from outside who are being told the entire time. I mean, there's been studies done that show on an anthropological sense from within police training that police training actually teaches and uses dog whistle words to create the idea that you are constantly in danger from, and they will use words like it's a jungle out there. and things like that to get you under this idea and impression, so you are constantly on guard when you're training as a police officer, right? And so you see that these things are very much translated into the way they handle every age within a community. This is why we saw an 11-year-old boy with I do not remember the mental health issue. I believe it was autism, whose mother did a welfare check call and he got shot by the cops because he was in the middle of the street and wouldn't get out of the street. He was having a meltdown. That's why his mother called. We see that there is this constant structure of criminalizing children. There is this constant structure of taking children from communities and putting them in incarceration spaces, right? We see that there is this constant removal of children from communities. And this removal of children from communities does not just happen with mass incarceration. We see that many children are removed from communities with CPS, from foster care, from being taken out completely. We do see that children are being removed from completely or from community in several different ways. We absolutely see that mass incarceration is removing children from communities and not putting them in an arguably safe space, because I don't think most foster care is actually safe. And not putting them in an arguably safe space, but putting them in a space that is not safe, and putting them in a space that is going to only encourage, courage destructive behavior, because encouraging destructive behavior is what's being taught, right? So when we see this, we have to understand that this is the racism within the system. Most of the children that you see in juvie should not be in juvie. Most of the children that you see in the system should not be in the system. This is all that racism. Even when it's happening to lighter skinned people, this is all that racism. And the reason that I can say that even when it's happening to lighter skinned people, this is all that racism, is because you have groups of lighter skinned people that are not deemed to be good for the futuring of the light skinned group, right? Carrie Bell is a very famous case of a young woman who was forcibly sterilized because her mother was homeless, basically. They called her a scoundrel and a whore, or a wastrel and a whore. And she had 2 children by 2 different fathers. And Carrie Bell turned 16 and got pregnant. Who knows how? And they decided that they were going to force sterilize her. And they forced sterilized her, and they forced sterilized her kids, because they decided that she was incapable of they didn't want her genes continuing their group, right? You see this with all the eugenic movement across the board, that not only does it do harm to people of color, it also does harm to those within the accepted scheme who don't live up to the high mono perfect standard that others are looking for. So we have to understand that this is not just harmful to Black and Indigenous women. This is also harmful to white women. It's harmful to white women when, dude, if you're given too much drugs in your pregnancy or in your childbirth, you'll end up having trouble with the childbirth. White women die as well. If, your child is not taken care of, in a healthy way and brought back to your room, or, you're shown favoritism on different levels, even those things can cause harm, right? We have to understand that there are so many groups of people out there who are like, it's not doing to me, it's not affecting me, it doesn't hurt me, right? But it's hurting all of us. If we can understand that women are not broken men, and that women no matter what their skin color, feel pain equally, and that, you know, traumatic experiences will influence the way somebody behaves, and understanding the traumatic experiences and helping through the traumatic experiences instead of ostracizing or villainizing is actually healthier all the way around, right? If we can understand those things, then we can be healthier as a whole. So, racism does not just hurt people of color, it absolutely hurts people of lighter skin as well. It absolutely causes harm to us all. When we're looking at this all really roots in that Western thought. And if you've been in my lives before, we've talked about this with paleoanthropology a few times. And we've talked about this a few times when we've talked about Western agriculture. Western thought and the start of Western thought is really this very destructive element within us. It is really this element within us that took us from safety and community for the first time. When I look at it, my understanding and my understanding of so many different spaces tells me that what we're looking at is this idea that you can own anything that is tangible, that breathes, that lives, because whether you know it or not, the earth breathes and lives. We are all part of this huge biome, and every part of this huge biome matters. And any part of this huge biome that's thrown out of whack affects every member of this huge biome, right? So when we're looking at this, what we're seeing is that this idea that you can own a piece of land and then own people comes very early when we see this start of cities rising out of agriculture. We have agriculture on a Western base beforehand, but Western agriculture on a massive scale, as opposed to you tending your garden, is very different. It is the thought that I own this piece of land because that king gave me this piece of land, and I have to pay him to own this piece of land, which in a sense, or in its essence, gives that king ownership of this land through me, right? To maintain this control, to maintain the control over food production, to maintain the control over people themselves, is where you get that start of othering, where you get that start of control of people by using fear tactics. Somebody else is going to get you, it's not me. Somebody else is out to harm you, it's not me. That person's going to harm you, it's not me. And when you see that this movement is really this method of control, you can actually look at our stories from our earliest rulers, our earliest written histories. Uh, and our earliest written histories really are roughly like 4,000 years after the start of our first cities. We see with these first rulers that there is this element of there's something wrong with this person. There is this element of dark triad of a personality disorder. When we look at the earliest stories, we look at stories that talk about being abandoned or uh, hard childhoods. Very frequently, it's abandoned childhoods. And when we look at that, we see that there is this element of I was abandoned as a child, but I was abandoned because my mother was a goddess of the water, and so she abandoned me because she couldn't raise me in the water because I was too human. Or I'm Zeus's child, right? But I have to hide from Hera, right? Though I don't know how many of them. I mean, I'm sure there are some out there. Uh, when we're looking at this, what we're seeing is this kind of textbook narcissistic personality disorder, megalomania personality disorder foundation. The gene for these things is going to be something that pops up as a mutation naturally within humans. I mean, not naturally, it's a mutation. I don't know exactly like the scheme of it. I'm not great at genes, but it is something that we would think that actually is, I'm sure that they trace the gene that they've nominated or they've decided actually shows the dark triad and narcissism. That if they trace that back, they'll be able to like find its origin. Like you can trace genes back now. So I'm sure at some point somebody will. When we're looking at this, you would see that somebody who has narcissism or megalomania has the gene within them, and then something in childhood causes this flip of their switch. It's a trauma in childhood. And then that huge trauma or that trauma within childhood that causes that flip of the switch turns off their empathy, turns on their need to control, turns off their compassion. When you look at early kings, what you see is a traumatic childhood, a godparent. Now I rule this nation and you need to submit to me. I rule this nation because I'm the child of a god. So I should have control and you should worship me. You see that on every level, it's about this need to control others. You've been found in the shower. Hello, Luna's partner. um, I'm so sorry for the finding in the shower, not for the watching. Absolutely. Have a great night, Luna. Pardon me, my lungs. You see that this control really traces back to our first cities. It really traces back to that need to maintain some form of. So most of us know things like, in the Great Depression, when they had so little food, people that came out of the Great Depression ended up hoarding food. People who have nothing in childhood, or people who go through great trauma in childhood, or at any point in their life go through great trauma that is doing without, right? On some level, have a tendency to kind of hoard that afterwards. So being abandoned as a baby and being raised, oftentimes by goat herders or shepherds or gardeners, you see that because almost all of them sound something like Moses. I mean, really, almost all of them do. You see that these children have a tendency to want in childhood. And because they have that tendency to want in childhood, as adults, they decide to rule nations so that they never want again. This is a start of really exploiting other people and exploiting other things, right? This is an exploitation of the land first and foremost, and then it's an exploitation of people. And when we see that exploitation start, is where we see that start of everything else. That is that moment of downhill. Because we see within this that we find not only this teaching of narcissism, but this breeding for narcissism. And when I say narcissism, the dark triad would probably be better. I use narcissism because I think it's a little bit easier to understand narcissism for most people. But the dark triad is narcissism, megalomania, and psychopathy. And they're characterized by a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion and a need of control. You see within this that when we see our rise of kings as narcissists, we see people need to breed with the kings to eat, right? They need to marry a king to eat. It's better if you're the king's wife. It's better if you're married to, some higher stratified person. Because if you're married to some higher stratified person, you will eat and your children will eat. And so you see that we start marrying into narcissism really easily and really early. And that marriage into that dark triad space really passes that gene along. And we see that that gene passes along when we look at early kings. When we look at any king throughout the ages, we will see where, you'll have a few that are okay, right? And you'll have a few that are off their literal rocker, absolutely insane. And then you'll have a few that are just really narcissistic or really megalomaniac or really, I mean, Henry VIII, megalomania. That's like textbook megalomania, right? And it's really thought that the megalomania comes from the blow on his head when he was 18. Like they've even traced where they think he, where they think the megalomania started with Henry VIII. There's a lot of uh, God, just child rearing in merry old England was horrific, anyways. But there's a lot of childhood trauma there, and then there is a blow to the head, and so they think that that's where the megalomania really even starts with Henry VIII. But they totally, have diagnosed Henry VIII as megalomaniac. Nero, Joanna the Mad, right? Like it's seen throughout history that narcissism will really pop up. And you see that not only does it pop up within the kings and the queens, but you also see that it starts to pop up between, whatever level the next level down is in whatever space you're in. It can be earls, it can be dukes, it can be, any other different name in any other different language, but those levels below. Because as long as it's hereditary, as long as you're marrying into these things, people are constantly marrying uh into food, into subsistence, into being able to live. And we see with this that these groups, because they're the groups that are hoarding the food, because they're the groups that are hoarding the resources, have a tendency to also produce more kids, as was said in here. And it's not just the crazy ones, but anybody who's in a position of power to actually like. So once you get to a point where we're settling, we're having kids all the time. Prehistory, we're not really having kids all the time. Like, you might have maybe one or two children, and you're most likely going to have them several years apart because you want one to grow up and be feasible and functional as a member of your group before you have another totally fucking vulnerable little bag of cry at everything for the monsters to hear, right? Like, you want to make sure that you put some time in between these things. And so once we get to a point where we're settled, we really start to get to a point, or not settled, but once we get to a point where we're in stratified societies, we really start to get to a point where we're popping out kids at a more frequent basis. Most don't live. Very frequently they don't. And very frequently they don't live because of malnutrition. Very frequently they don't live because disease is rife in cities. Cities are rife with disease. Cities are, and always have been, very horrific for disease. Even if you have fantastic plumbing, you still have a whole bunch of people in one space coughing on each other. So disease is, cities are and always have been centers of disease. And from the initial, like our earliest plagues go back to our earliest cities. So when we see this, we see that people having massive amounts of children, growing humanity, go forth and populate, really start having massive amounts of children. But the ones that are living and making it through are the ones that are getting fed, which means that they're the ones that are on higher levels of society, the ones that are, you're having with your narcissist, the ones that you're having, with the children of narcissists. And so this gene is popping, right? I personally believe that the high prevalence that we have of narcissism and megalomania and psychopathy in our world today, which I believe that the last number I read was 15% of our society. So 15% of 8 billion is because we bred for it. Pretty much anybody on the planet today can trace themselves back to a ruler in some space. It's going to be a little bit harder, I think, if you're looking at people whose ancestry is almost pure Turtle Island indigenous, to trace back to a king or a ruler, because some cultures really didn't have that over here. Some cultures did, but some cultures really didn't. The majorities didn't really have like huge kings or rulers. But anything from Europe is really, I think like maybe it's 10 or 15% of the world population is descended from Genghis Khan. And I mean the world population. If you get to Mongolia, that percentage doubles, triples. Like I think over 50 or 60% of Mongolian population is descended from Genghis Khan. Right. So um, there are millions of people descended from Charlemagne. I'm a descendant of Charlemagne, a Merovingian. And there are literally millions of people descended from the Merovingian line, from the Charlemagne dynasty. Um, there are, across, they found descendants of Ramses here in the United States, of Ramses the Third, right? So, oh, that's awesome, Jackie. So we see that there is, literally like people related to kings and queens across the globe. And really, that is because of the fact that in any society that is stratified, you're going to find that you're going to have more children survive from the higher levels of stratified society, higher stratified layers. Again, it's just because of the fact that they eat. When medical care is available, they have medical care. They have warm clothing, they have a secure home. you know um, there's still a lot of infant mortality rate because you still see cities causing that spread of disease, and there's still a lot of susceptibility to disease. And it doesn't matter what level of society you're on, that susceptibility to disease is still there. But everything else really gets softened. All the other blows get softened the higher you go. And so you see that there's, this genetic trace. And you can see that that really kind of breeds narcissism, really kind of breeds that megalomaniac thought process. And that's not even till we get to the thought of teaching it. So we live in a society that teaches or taught for at least 1,000 years, and especially here in America, one that is founded on, though it says that it's not, a principle of narcissism as love. If you read the actual words of the Bible, Pharaoh's interaction with God, God goes to Moses and says, Moses, go and tell Pharaoh I'm going to do this. And Moses goes to Pharaoh and he says, I want you to let my people go or God's going to do this to you. And Pharaoh goes, okay, let me think about it and discuss it with my advisors and we'll figure out how we're going to do this. And Moses leaves. And he says, come back in the morning and we'll get you out of here. And Moses leaves. And God goes to Pharaoh. And God says to Pharaoh, don't do it. God hardens Pharaoh's heart against the Israelites. Literally over and over in almost every chapter and in every verse of Exodus, in every interaction between Moses and the Pharaoh, Pharaoh says, okay, God tells him no. So every single interaction is God punishing Pharaoh for doing what God told Pharaoh to do. And not just punishing Pharaoh for doing what God told Pharaoh to do, but punishing the children and the people of Egypt for what God told Pharaoh to do. You see that God specifically says, I am doing this so you will so your people will laud and praise me for eternity. Right? So when we look at this, we see that there is this teaching that this is Pharaoh or God loving the Israelites. This is God trying to work with Pharaoh. This is how this is taught. It's not, though, right? It's actually a very narcissistic behavior. Do you go to one of your children and punish them for doing what you told them to do, all the while telling your other child they're just fucked up? Sorry. Right? And when we're looking at that, we have to see, when we teach that narcissistic behavior is loving behavior, then we teach people to abuse their children and create traumatized people. When we are teaching that abusive behavior is a positive, that controlling somebody is what you're supposed to be doing, instead of guiding and teaching, and that traumatizing somebody is a way to control somebody, then we are teaching narcissistic behavior as love. So we are literally teaching people that it is loving to abuse your children. And when we are teaching people that it is loving to abuse your children, you deal with people who are abusing their children with total intent of love. That doesn't mean it's okay, but with total intent of love. They just don't understand how abusive it is because they were taught it was love. When you look at things like the forced impregnation of a 13-year-old, and abandoning her in a society that would stone her and kill her for that, and then killing that offspring in a traumatic way, there's not a whole lot of love about that. And this whole time we're teaching people that you're supposed to act like God. You're supposed to be godlike in your behavior. You're supposed to act like Jesus, though we don't teach how Jesus actually acts. On my page, there's a link to a song called Jesus Was a Drag Queen, and let me tell you, it's my favorite song these days. We see that this creation of narcissism behavior within our parenting styles, this creation of a parenting style that is really abusive, really pushes down. We are definitely taught it's not okay to question those teachings either. I was taught I wasn't allowed to say no. I don't know about anybody else. I do know quite a few people. I was taught I was not allowed to say no. I was not allowed to ask a question about it. And I was not allowed to say no. That if I was told to do something, I did it. Period. And it didn't matter if what I was told to do was go to my room, clean the house, go to school, watch my sister, stay at home when there's a forest fire over the hill. It didn't matter what it was. You're not allowed to say no. Never tell your parent but the answer I usually got was because I said so. Why did you do that, Sarah? Because is not an answer. Why do I have to do this, Mom? Because I said so. Right? Like and we were taught that we should respect people who did not show us common respect because of their age. Not because of their behavior, not because of who they were, but because of their age. We have to see that all of this teaches us a lack of boundaries, teaches us a lack of healthy space, teaches us a lack of healthy relationships, and teaches us that it's okay to be controlled and to control. And that not only is it okay to be controlled and to control, but we're supposed to be controlled and to control. So when we look at this, we absolutely see where this narcissistic parenting style gets taught to us through initially Western thought and then into the Bible as it comes down. The stories of the Bible are the stories that were taught at the time. Literally, the story of Moses is the same story that you see for Sargon. It is the same story that you see for Enlil. You see that the early kings all have this same story of, almost always it's down a river in a basket too. Like, I mean, I know it's in, I just can't remember which actual epic it's in. Um, da, 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 da. Hold on a second. I know I have it. I just want to find it. This is what happens when you mark too many spaces. Leave this in this series. I'm trying to. I think I just skipped it over twice. Anyways, I think it's Sargon. But it literally talks about being set afloat in a basket on a river and being pulled out by a gardener and raised by the gardener, and how he was set in the basket by a nymph as his mother. We see that really within all of this old stuff, it really just details out this same narrative. Once you get, so if you look at it like in other spaces, like look at the sagas. Hi. When you're looking at like the sagas, you're seeing like with the sagas that they're written down like 300 or 400 years after the end of this time. And what you're seeing is that they're written down, taken from the oral histories and traditions, and then they're being written down. So when you're looking at this early myth, when you're looking at all of these early stories, what you're seeing is that the stories are all from the same space. They're all this idea of these early stories that have been told getting written down at the point that writing really starts. And in this point where writing really starts and this stuff gets written down, it is very literally this documentation really of the same people once you take it back far enough. And they're all this, or the same theory of thought, right? The same. We talked before about gods being like archetypes, it's the same archetypes. And the stories just get documented into different ways within the archetype or within the effect of the world around them. So if your archetype is coming out of the Nile region where the flooding of every year causes this huge rebirth of the land, then that rebirth archetype is going to become pretty huge and in the tales and the stories, right? If you're coming out of the Middle East where the dearth of fertility is starting to really already happen in many spaces by the time we get our earliest written histories, because of those early cities and because of that Western agriculture through that region that causes climate destruction in its first point. You see that this this early construction of these myths really traces back to the same. All of these spaces are so intertwined at this point in time. We like to think of the Middle East, the Levant area, the Arabian Peninsula as being separate from Egypt and North Africa, but they're really all intertwined. And really all of this is all along the Mediterranean basin. And you see that all of this space along the Mediterranean basin is doing this constant interflow. We know that like the Assyrians like conquered Egypt at some point, and the Persians conquered Egypt at some point. Like there's so much of this in and out flux, right, in North Africa. And we've talked about this, that North Africa Levant area has been this flux space since the Neanderthals. So when you're looking at that, what you're seeing is that these stories are carrying across space because they're all within the same space. They're all stories of a life that's really in the same space. And the Nile is a space that has seen human habitation for 2 million years. The Nile has been inhabited by Homo erectus for 2 million years. The Nile was inhabited by Habilis and Boisei before it was inhabited by Erectus. So the Nile has been inhabited literally by humanity for at least 3 million years. And so we see that in that region, those stories just follow the same thought. It's all about that river. It's all about that abandonment in those early kings, of course, with the narcissism within that. And so they all just kind of flow together. And again, these aren't really creation myths. These are myths about those first kings. They're the stories of how these first kings come to be. None of these first kings are likely to really have floated along a river. It's more likely that they were abandoned or foundlings, or they didn't like their parents, or there's more likely to be other different things. But the idea of the baby in the river cross translates through all these different cultures. So again, you see these children who are harmed and abandoned in childhood and growing up to control. This is really where we get that othering to control the masses really start to come in. The othering to control the masses is really, if I can convince you that anything but me is the problem, then you'll let me rule. And it starts with the barbarians in the hills, and it goes all the way down to today when we see it's the immigrants and the houseless, right? How dare they be houseless? How dare they, not be able to put a roof over their head, right? We see that this othering really goes across every faucet, because this othering going across every faucet is this tool that is being used. And we buy into it. We buy into the ideology that's being used against us. If you're indoctrinated into believing something from the moment you've come out of the womb, what else are you going to believe? The reason that I like to come in and remind people that we're not evil, that innately we're nurturing and communal, and we are curious, is because if you think that you're innately evil, then you can't fix it. It's innately who you are. You can't change who you are innately. But if you understand that that's not innate, that nobody is born innately evil, that evil itself does not exist. Evil humans exist. Do not get me wrong. I've married one. Evil humans absolutely exist. Evil does not exist. Evil people exist. But evil as a concept, as a deity, as an overall, as an overarching, as a what's trying to kill you. I mean, I guess I could say that, the top people are kind of evil in their lack of empathy and compassion. And sometimes they're actually very manipulative and stuff like that. So I can see that. But definitely not as a good and evil balance, right? It's not about a balance of good and evil, because evil isn't something to fight. Evil is something humanity's created, right? Evil isn't something that's here. Evil is something humanity has created. Just like, well, we used to fear the megafauna. The only thing we have to fear today is each other, right? Really, the only thing that causes us harm these days is each other. So, just like that, when we look at this as a broader scale, we see that evil doesn't exist as a broader scale. There is no good versus evil. What there is those in charge versus the rest of us down here. And you see that not only do they other, but they also tell you it's somebody else in the government. It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans. Two wings, same bird. Don't matter what color it is, they're the same fucking feathers. They're flying the same path, right? But as long as I can get you to believe it's not me, then you're going to continue to serve me. You're going to continue to worship me. You're going to continue to be under my control. You're going to continue to be able to be abused by me, to be exploited by me, to be harmed by me. As long as I can convince you that it's anybody but me, this is triangulation and isolation. We know this in a narcissistic abuse pattern, where they isolate you and convince you it's everybody but them that's the problem. So as long as I convince you that it's everybody but me that's the problem, I stay in charge. I rule. I eat good and you starve. And I've convinced you that it's your fault anyways, right? This is othering. This is really where othering is this effective tool that has created this effective class structure, this effective stratified structure that is really keeping us in this space, really keeping us in this trauma. We see that this othering is really the start of grape culture as well. We see that we don't see a gender or a weaker sex until we see the Greeks. And we see that the Greeks are really our first instance of sexual lateral violence between the genders. And we see that the Greeks are really that first instance of lateral violence between the genders, because we see that the Greeks really have this need to, this need to control. We also see that so the Greeks have several different types of love, and the love that they preferred was with younger boys and young teenagers. That was their preferred love. And so they demonized women. And you see that the start of gender fighting comes in, the better gender, the weaker gender, the stronger gender, right? Nodding, but I won't see that. I do that all the time. I'll grin at the screen when nobody can see me. Nod along. We see that start really creates this idea that, so we see where land becomes a possession. We see where animals become a possession. We see where other humans become a possession. This is where you see. So in all of those things, like if other humans are becoming a possession, they're not the same as you, right? They're usually it's like the barbarians, and we're capturing the barbarians and they're the slaves at this point, right? And slavery is an entirely different thing at this point. We see though that the Greeks are the first that can take this not as a between different societies or between different cultures, but create it within the culture. They're the first that can create othering within a culture by making that othering gender. So once they make biological sex or gender the other base, they're able to create a space within their culture where one is under the control or possession of the other. And in this ability to create that within the culture, we're seeing that the idea that you can own land, the idea that you can own animals really gets doubled down into the idea that women are nothing more than objects to be owned. I am a walking womb, and that's my only use on this planet, right? And so when we see that women become nothing more than objects to be owned, a walking womb, that's my purpose on this planet, is to spread my legs and bear your seed. We absolutely see that great culture arises. Uh, and it really roots in that thought process that I'm not allowed to say no. Can't say no to my mom, can't say no to you, right? Most people are unaware that we outlawed marital rape in 1990. Up until the 90s in the United States, you could legally force your spouse to have sex with you. They couldn't charge you. So we see that, and I mean, it could be violent and they still couldn't charge you because you were supposed to give it up anyways. You married him. So we see that this really roots in that idea that women are possessions that need to be underneath the control of a man. We see this really roots in that idea that men are supposed to be into control, that you're supposed to be in control of anybody else, that one person is supposed to control another person, that one person has the right to control another person. When we mix this with this narcissism thought process, and we mix this with how much that's become a part of the top percent or the top stratification in society, the top level of society, we see that really doubles down. So narcissism and megalomania and psychopathy are very much characterized again by having a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion and a need to control. So you see this lack of empathy, this lack of compassion, this need to control others, not self, but others, becomes this. So we know this is alpha male sometimes, right? An alpha male is like other alpha males. They don't like beta males, and women aren't worth anything. And you all got to be alpha, right? So you see that this idea that only people that are like you, only people that are narcissists, only people who lack that empathy, only people that lack that compassion are your equals. Everybody else is sheep. Everybody else is to be exploited. Everybody else is to be harmed. Only people that lack the basic human necessities of compassion and empathy are actually human to you, are actually your equal to you. And when we see that great culture rises as well. Because, we view the female gender or the female sex as being nurturing, as being loving, as being compassionate. So, a narcissist or a psychopath is going to view it as a weakness. And so, therefore, they need to be controlled by somebody else, anyways. So, we see that this really gets steeped in that Western thought when we get to the idea that it comes from the ancient Greeks when it comes to that gender othering, and B, that it comes from that need to control another, and that ability to dehumanize a being, that ability to remove a being's rights, that ability to decide that a being doesn't have the right to have autonomy, right? when we decide that a being doesn't have the right to autonomy, just like, we initially decide that the land doesn't have its own autonomy, when we decide that other human beings don't have their own autonomy, really we get this culture built on the ability to exploit and harm others. So if we can see that anybody that doesn't equal us doesn't have autonomy. Um, if I decide that I have tightly coiled hair, and everybody who doesn't have tightly coiled hair is not my equal, and therefore everybody else doesn't deserve a space in society anyways, I can rule over them, right? Um, we see that this is happening. It's taking a specific aspect of a person and deciding that everybody that doesn't share that aspect isn't worth living. And when we see this, we see that those that we are allowing to be in charge, those who are our top percentage in whatever stratified society that we're living in, but specifically in the United States within this, are very much demonizing compassion, demonizing empathy. We see this demonization of compassion and empathy when we demonize the houseless. We see this demonization of compassion and empathy when the first words out of our mouths were, "What did he do to get shot?" We see this demonization of compassion and empathy when we ask what she was wearing. We see this demonization of compassion and empathy when we pass laws to, put spikes on the ground, or that you can't feed the homeless, or that you get to control somebody's gender expression or sexual desire. We see that this lack of compassion and empathy gets legislated. We see that we use words like communism and socialism to make compassion and empathy and community evil. And we get lured in by these propaganda tactics. So we have to remember that all of these tactics out there that are being used, you see somebody comes across and tells me they're pro-life. My first understanding with that is you don't know why you're pro-life. You've decided that you're pro-life. I personally would never get an abortion personally. I personally couldn't. I personally believe that nothing I feel for my body applies to anybody else's body on this entire fucking planet. I don't get the control of that. I don't even get the control of that with my own children, and I birthed them. When we're looking at somebody who's like, "I'm pro-life," and that's just it. Okay, why are you pro-life? Well, God says. But does he though? And why do you think your God should rule over somebody else's ideas, right? When you're looking at somebody who is talking about being pro-life, 9 times out of 10, they're not talking from a place of knowing. They're talking from a place of talking points. They're talking from a place of somebody's propaganda that keeps popping across whatever feed that they have. And instead of looking deeper, they're doing what every other human being on this planet is doing. They're scrolling through and clicking on that article and reading it. We all do it. Can't be any more mad at them for doing it unless you're not doing it, right? Unless you are deliberately researching and going to 5 or 6 different articles and taking both sides and looking at both sides. You can't be mad at somebody for buying into the side that's fed to them by a spoon. Oftentimes, nose plugged, take this. You can't be mad at somebody for doing the same things you're doing. You can't educate them. You can try and make them see using their own logic. You can get them to understand. Sometimes, not always, some people are willfully ignorant. And those who are willfully ignorant, you just kind of ignore unless they're doing active harm. And then you got to figure out how you can stop that active harm, right? But we have to understand that it's an indoctrination. And we have to understand that everybody is being spoon-fed bullshit, including us. I mean, Trump wasn't our worst president until the pandemic. I've said it before. I'll say it 1,000 times. He was another old racist, rapist, white dude, like every other president except for Obama. And that doesn't mean Obama was a ruler. I mean, it doesn't mean that Obama was great. Obama had his problems too, right? He wasn't into children like the rest of them. Huh. I would say he probably wasn't racist, though it's not like he helped indigenous people. Like so it Trump was a president like the rest of the fucking presidents. They're all out to hurt you, right? So what if he said grab him by the pussy? Don't let him. How about that, right? Like, you can't sit there and go, this is the worst. Whenever we have a president literally named Indian Killer Jackson. Literally, right? Literally what we called him. And we could talk about Jefferson and his 15-year-old kept in a basement slave that he kept forever, right? We have presidents who are just as horrific as Trump, just as bad as Trump, right? Until we get to the pandemic. And that's not because he was a shitty president. That's because he was an idiot. I mean, literally, it was, oh my God, you're stupid. Why are you so stupid? Right? Again, though, we're dealing with somebody who is buying into the fucking propaganda. All he's doing is watching Fox News. It's feeding him bullshit, right? So as we're doing this and we're looking at this and we're like, oh my God, Trump is the worst thing that ever fucking happened. As the other side, I should say, is over here going, oh my God, Trump is the worst thing that ever happened. We've never had a president this bad. Yes, we have. Yeah, we have. Take accountability for the crap. Because until we can take accountability for the past crap, we can't get rid of the future crap. Right? And so it's really, really difficult for us to step outside of ourselves and double check the propaganda that we're being fed. It's as difficult for the other side as it is for you. And we have to have that understanding and compassion. We have to have that knowledge. And the reason we have to have it is because unless we can have that understanding and compassion and knowledge and see why they think the way they do, we can never change their mind. Because I cannot get you to change your mind unless I speak to you in a language you can understand. So if I can go to you and go, okay, so human life is valid, right? All human life is valid. Even a fetus's human life is valid, right? So what about a newborn's human life? Is that not valid too? So how do we ensure to take care of that, right? So if my human life is valid and the fetus's human life is valid, at what point does that fetus's life supersede my life? Right? What point do I, as a living, breathing, walking being, no longer have the right of bodily autonomy? Right? Is it a heartbeat if there's no heart to beat? Right? If there's actually no heart, it's just an electrical impulse. So if I can go to somebody and use their logic and use their understanding to show them a new way, they are more likely to not only understand it, but they are more likely to hold it, to keep it. Not just hear me, but hold it and keep it. I'd have a conversation. Met my father in 2020, blood father. My blood father is a old white dude who is very loud and has worked in heavy fields his whole life. So he's been doing heavy equipment kind of stuff his whole life. So it's always, been a very loud environment with a lot of men. And he constantly yells and he constantly cusses and he doesn't listen to anybody and he talks over everybody. And pretty much anytime I talk to him, I seem to trigger him. And as I was thinking, and as I, have learned more about him and have learned more about my brothers and everything else, I've come to the realization that just like I am triggered by the fact that he is a white dude screaming at me, which automatically triggers me because I have abuse from white dudes over and over again. Um, and a stranger to top it, right? Um, just like I have dealt with that abuse my entire life. And so this is triggering for me. For him, he has dealt with loud, aggressive women his whole life, and they have done a number on him. I think in some places it's his own fucking fault, but in some places it's absolutely not. And because they have done a number on him, I'm triggering for him. I'm not a manipulative person. If all you've ever experienced, though, is manipulative people who use typical regular tactics to manipulate, then my stuff might come across as I'm trying to manipulate you, right? If loud women have triggered you, and the fact that my voice can be loud has triggered you, if if you don't like being spoken over and I don't like being spoken over, and you're speaking over me and I'm speaking over you, right? So I had to sit and have a conversation and explain to him, listen, I need you to understand that just like you have been traumatized by women your whole life, especially loud women, especially intelligent women, I have been traumatized by angry, loud white boys my whole fucking life. So having some angry, loud white boy screaming in my face how I'm supposed to respect his ass is not going to work for me because I've earned my laws and I don't know who the fuck you are, right? You're not showing me respect that I've earned and I don't even know you. You want me to respect you, but so if we can understand that, if I can take to him and show him that his reaction to me is the same as my reaction to him, then maybe he can understand to take a step back. We had a long conversation. We discussed it. I was like, okay, so what we need to do is give each other a chance to talk. And when one of us is talking, the other one just needs to shut the fuck up. And he was talking, and I thought he stopped and tried to interject, and he kept talking. And instead of me trying to continue to interrupt, I just let him finish talking. And afterwards, I told him, I said, so I want you to understand that I had something to say and you talked over me, but I shut up and I let you continue because I respect you. And that's a sign of respect. So you need to see that you are getting the respect that you're demanding, and also see where you need to give that respect in return because it's being given to you, you know. And at this point, he can start to see, maybe I should shut up and listen from time to time. Not sure how well it'll translate, but if you can go to somebody and explain to it from a point that they can understand from their side, right? If you can logic from their side to your side, they will absolutely be able to change. It's the only way you can really change anybody's mind, right? You cannot change anybody's mind by threatening them. You can absolutely change somebody's mind by beating them, right? But you can't change anybody's mind by threatening them. You can't change anybody's, if somebody thinks you're mean, you can't beat them to death to get them to think otherwise, you know. Hopefully, it just is, and I don't care too much. I mean, I do, but I don't like. I haven't had a family since I was 16 years old. It doesn't really, And I'm certainly not going to invite family in who's going to treat me bad. You're going to treat me on my respect levels, or you're just not there. So I do hope it works out. I want to have that relationship, but I'm also, you know, long ago given up on thinking that I know that many people, I think that their minds are changed or that they're going to act differently, and they don't. So I just don't like, yeah, yeah. Like it's one of those things that matters, but it doesn't. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And there's not much I can do about it not working. All I can do is, hope that it really truly got through and continue to act in the best possible way I can. He was complaining about my brother, and I was like, you're complaining about something that you do. Like, you're upset with my brother for not listening to you, but you just sat here and talked about how you don't listen to him. So maybe you need to show him how one listens. As a parent, maybe you should, teach him how to listen by showing him how to do it. And he was like, oh, okay, maybe, like it's a little bit different for, I think, people when your child's an adult, right? Because you got that thought process that, as a child, it's my child, but at the same point, it's a fully grown adult, and it's like I told him, I was like, he when he came back here to drop my brother off a couple years ago, or in 2020, we got into it. And we got into it because he wasn't respecting my boundaries about my parking lot in my home. Like, I was trying to tell him, you can't do that, I'll get in trouble. He didn't respect John, my brother. And when I tried to talk to him, he was screaming and yelling at me about how nobody respects him and how I have to respect him and blah, blah, blah. And I told him at the time, I'm like, I don't have to respect you. I don't know you, but you certainly have to treat me with respect if you ever think that you're going to get anything out. Like I treat you with basic respect, treat everybody with basic respect, but I'm not going to drill sergeant anybody. And I told him, I said, I'm a war vet. I've stood lines. I don't know who the fuck you are, but you're coming at me like I should be on guard. So, why the fuck do you think that I would respect you if you're treating me in a way that like I don't deserve respect myself? Of course, I said it in a much blunter way at the time. And I told him this time, because he watched some of my TikToks. I showed him one and he's like, you're like, you come across as aggressive. People aren't going to listen to you because you come across as aggressive. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't come across as aggressive and you don't see me as a girl. Y'all think I'm aggressive because I sound like an angry white girl. Totally discounting the fact that I'm not white and I'm not a girl, right? You think that I'm aggressive because I'm speaking to you like a man. That's why you think I'm aggressive, because I'm speaking like a man and I got tits. And you're like, ooh, if a woman's speaking like a man, she's aggressive. And I told him, I said, you think I'm aggressive, because I'm speaking to you the way you speak to people, but you don't think that you're aggressive. And if it was another dude acting like that, you wouldn't think he was aggressive, but you think I'm aggressive because you see something with tits, not me. And you think that I'm just some girl, but I've earned my lauds. I've stood walls. I'm a male as well as a female. And you don't get to, decide that I'm supposed to tone down my masculinity because you think I'm a chick, And that was a really whoa moment, it was really a conceptualize of, oh, well, shit, maybe. And I mean, he's very gender open. Like he's always been like, it's not like he's definitely LGBTQ part, so like it's not like he's, unaccepting of those kind of things. But to be able to really hear, that's just because you see tits. You think I'm a girl. You don't see your son in your daughter, You don't see the fact that I'm as much of a boy as I am as a girl, And I think that that's another thing that we just really don't get. We're really taught that certain genders act a certain way and that what we see as gender is gender. If I see somebody with tits, that's obviously a girl and she's supposed to act like this. And it's like, you got to stop that shit, you know? And when we use that, it's really a part of that grape culture and it's really a part of that othering. It's really a part of that idea that everybody is supposed to act in this very narrow perception and this very narrow viewpoint. This very narrow idea of perfection, very monolithic idea of perfection. We are not monolithic. We're becoming monolithic and it's killing us and we hate it, right? We see that Western agriculture is a result of Western thought, and Western thought is a result of Western agriculture. We see that rise of cities is really a result of Western agriculture, and that rise of cities being that result of Western agriculture also incorporates that ownership, and that incorporation of ownership, the idea that you can possess land, the idea that you can possess people, really becomes really part of the issue that Western agriculture causes. The first Western agriculture-based city that we have is Angazal. And Angazal is in 9000 BCE. It is in the Middle East, along a river in the Levant. And it caused climate destruction in 300 years. It started in an extremely fertile valley, and then they took everything out and replaced it with their agriculture and their herd animals, and they destroyed the valley. Um, we see with Angazal this first start of Western agriculture as a civilization tool, as a city base, as a stratification base, and we see have a great one. And we see that that Western agriculture base causes climate destruction really early on. We also see within early cities that it's actually so disease ridden. We see within cities today they're so disease ridden. Um, and we see that this climate destruction that it causes in its first experiments, in its first try out the gate, really continues on. It never ends. This is because what they do with Western agriculture is they come in and they rip all the nutrients out of the soil, uh, put in plants that have no nutrients to depend on around them, and then pump chemicals or pump fertilization or pump anything they possibly can to try and get those plants to actually live because of the fact that they took away all the nutrients that the plants needed to live. It is really a denuding of the world. We see that in the Great Plains, in California, specifically in the United States, we see there's a song that says, "You think you're going to a sugar bowl, but you're going to a dust bowl." And what it is that they came across California in its initial space, and the documentations of the landing in California by the Spaniards is of a fertile garden. North America, Turtle Island was east to west, north to south, tended garden. All documentations by all Europeans coming in, it was a tended garden coast to coast. When we see that tended garden, Europeans decided to yank all of that tended garden out and replace it with monoculture. And in yanking all of that tended garden out and then replacing it with monoculture, they robbed the soil of its nutrients and they robbed the soil of its stability. Prairies actually create this extremely stable root network that is like several feet deep. And that several feet deep, stable root network in this very loamy soil often actually creates the ability for that soil to stay in place. And so they came in and they just ripped the prairie out and replaced it with monoculture. And when they had really drained the soil of all nutrients to the point that that no crops would grow anymore, they pulled the crops. They couldn't grow anyways. And this turns into a dust bowl. And this is why you see that California really became a dust bowl and really was a place of great hardship during the Great Depression because of this dust bowl, because of the fact that they really just stripped the land of all of its livability, all of its biome. So we see that even today, we see like in Brazil, in many places in South America, where they are going through and stripping out forests so that they can plant crops. All this mono crop stuff actually just creates environment destruction, because what it does is it destroys the biome. It robs the biome of the biome. Like it takes everything out of the biome and it has nothing to replace it with. And as it's taking everything out of the biome and not replacing it with everything, it is robbing the biome of every level of nutrient for every level of being. It robs the biome of the nutrient for the animals. It robs the biome of the nutrient from the other plants, and therefore robs the biome of nutrient for us. So we see that this causes climate change in the climate itself, or not climate change, climate destruction in the climate and in the biome itself. We also see that it causes a lot of problems for us. We are very mono diet right now. Pretty much half of the stuff in your cupboard is corn product. Uh, and if it's not corn product, it's most likely wheat product. So everything you are eating is coming from a singular nutrient base at this point. Most of us try and eat some protein. Most of us try and eat, a couple of different things, but your chips, your bread, your cereal, your starches for your food, oftentimes just different levels of things that you are eating have either corn or wheat in them, especially in the United States. Um, so you find that you're really getting these two very narrow food groups. When you're doing that, you're not providing your body with all the things it needs. And in not providing with all the things it needs, we end up with high cases of diabetes. We see this especially when we're looking at places where things like commodities are given, places where the food desert problems are really high. So, a place where it's hard to get to food. If you're living in a space where it's an hour from any grocery store, it's really hard to get to food. If you're living in a space where the grocery store doesn't sell any food, fruits or vegetables, it's hard to get fruits or vegetables. So you're seeing that um, food deserts really get created within this. And when you mix the mono nutrient, right, um, in things like, commodity boxes or, massive amounts of carbohydrates, massive amounts of corn products, massive amounts of wheat products. Um, your cheese is hydrogenated corn oil or, things like that. You're finding that this very mono diet doesn't meet all the needs and diabetes skyrockets. You're finding that not only does diabetes skyrocket, heart condition issues skyrocket, blood pressure issues skyrocket, anemia skyrockets. Really, on so many levels, you're not getting the nutrient need that you need to maintain a healthy biome within your body because you're not getting the multiple things that we need. We are omnivoric for a reason. We have always eaten fruits and vegetables and meat. We have always eaten it all. We have always the, we have always needed to be able to eat it all. And even in cultures, there was a recent article that I was reading that was talking about how they've decided that gender roles don't really exist in earlier cultures um, because their idea that gender roles subsist based on hunting and gathering, and that males are hunters and females are gatherers because gathering is less um, expensive and gathering is less likely to kill you, which I would disagree with because bears come where berries are. But uh, they're showing that you can get so earlier cultures often ate the internal the digestive. It's called digesta, and what it is it's the stomach contents when they kill a large animal. So you would kill a large animal and then you would eat the stomach contents. And they're showing that humans can actually survive on the stomach contents as their vegetative content for their diet. So you can actually uh, get both protein and vegetable needs met per hunting alone for a community of 25 is what they figured. That in a community of 25, if everybody kills at least I think it was uh, six animals a year, that they have enough food to be able to have enough of their protein needs met and enough of their vegetative needs met from the digesta. So we're seeing that so we know that we are omnivoric, that we have to have both. And when we are just eating one thing, when we're just getting our nutrients from one level, we get sick. This is why vegans and vegetarians get sick unless they find alternative proteins. And even then, you cannot get plant-based proteins that will meet all the needs of meat-based proteins. We absolutely need meat-based proteins to actually get through. So when we're looking at that, you got to just diversify your diet, right? You can't, and it's hard, and it is, right? For many of us, we're flat fucking broke and the cheap shit works, right? Like, for many of us, you eat what you can get. And unfortunately, most of what we get is based in a corn or wheat based diet. Um, I think that's it. I think that's the list. If you have any questions, anything we want to talk about, I can do that for a little bit, and then I'll probably go ahead and take off because we've been going for a couple of hours. And I'll likely be back tomorrow early afternoon or morning. Maybe over the same subjects. We'll see. But if you have any questions on any of the things we've gone over today, I'm more than happy to answer. And I think that's it. Otherwise, hi, Alms, how are you doing? Hi, Richard. I see there's a lot of people that came in. I see Bird. Jackie's been here for a minute. I see Lisa May. Kylie's been here the whole time. Ari left us. Alms has been here for a minute too. I know that. I saw you earlier. I don't know who else is still here. Absolutely, Linda. Have a great evening, and I'm glad you enjoyed. I haven't done one of these in a hot minute. I'll try and do a couple of them over the next couple of days. I've been trying to avoid a little bit of the political at the same point. I'm kind of wondering if I get live banned and lose my live studio access, because if I get live banned and lose my live studio access, if my stream might actually go up, because I don't think that my stuff is getting out very much. So I'm like, maybe I need to just be banned for a second. But so I'll probably be doing a couple more political things over the next couple of days. Thank you guys. I really appreciate that. All of them are live streaming concurrently on YouTube now. So since I'm set back up in the new space. So if you are coming in late, or if you missed some of it, they are all over on YouTube. And then I've been doing, this morning I did some artwork. I'm working on a book. Absolutely, Richard. And it is all over on the YouTube channel, which is the n.wita.org. So the whole live there, if you want to listen to it. I've been working on the book. I'm doing a progressive piece of artwork for the children's book that I'm writing, and so for the illustration for the children's book. So I was doing that this morning, and I'm trying to get that finished up and worked on. Oh, that's awesome, Jackie. Okay, I'm going to go for a couple more minutes and see if there's any questions. I really appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for coming in, sitting with me. Thank you for all the wonderful gifts tonight. And thank you for your support. It really means a lot to me. I do things because I feel like I need to. It's very beautiful to know and to hear that they're received and loved sometimes, because I often have a hard time remembering that myself, right? I have a hard time remembering my own worth sometimes. Hey, I'll come in and tell you your worth all day long. I'm going to have a hard time remembering mine. It's that humanity. Absolutely, Cal. You're welcome, May. Thank you guys so much. And I will be around probably. It's a little bit of everything. I'm trying to kind of skip it up around and about for the live schedule right now, mainly because I want to try and get a few different time zones. I usually come on in the morning for a little bit. I come on. This is probably my second or third evening this week, or in the last 7-day period. So I'm going to try and, kind of mix it up a little bit. I meant to put out a live, whatever. I'm going live now, or going live then, earlier today, but I didn't get to it. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it in tonight. I wasn't sure when I was going to make it in after the live this morning with the drawing. But I am trying to be in here just a little bit more. I need to kind of like set something up where I can send out alerts that I'm going live to people, so that people can actually know I'm going live on a broad scale. Like in here, I can only share to like 15 people at a time. If I can get it to where it sets up as a an alert, it might be a little bit easier for people to see. I want to make sure that it's available for people. Thank you so much. You do. Have a great night, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and take off and relax a bit. I will see you guys all tomorrow. Yeah, I would have to probably do it outside of here. Like, so other than the live events, I don't think, and I don't even think with the live events, it gives anybody alerts. Um, I might be able to do it on YouTube, but I think that's about it. And so you'd have to be able to YouTube subscribe. So, anyways, have a great night, guys. And I will see what I can do about that. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye. I could Discord it. That's true. Not everybody's over there, though. And I forget about Discord. Goodbye, YouTube. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.